drink alcohol, we're told, because everyone else is, and the sensuality and sexuality that takes place among those who are not yet married. All of these things trouble our hearts, and the question I want to address tonight is, what can we do to the best of our ability to prepare a rock-solid home so that when these things start tugging at your children and mine, they'll be equipped to be able to say no? Now, let me hasten to say something here that I didn't used to say when I preached on this subject. When I was a young preacher boy, I would get up in the pulpit. Now, mind you, I didn't have any children then. And I kind of remind myself now of the story I heard about the young preacher who got up and even though he had no children, he said, "I'm preaching this morning on the 10 Commandments of child rearing." And he preached and he lowered the boom down on the parents and let them know what they should and shouldn't do. And then he had a child, and that child became about 2 years old. And he got up to preach again, and he said, "I'm going to preach this morning on 10 suggestions for child rearing." And then the child got a little older and got to the teenage years. And he stood up to preach, and he said, "I'm going to preach today on 10 tips that just might help you as a parent." Now, don't get me wrong. It's not that this book lacks information on the subject. There's plenty of information on the subject. But I need to have a humility in preaching on this subject for this reason right here. And I really want you to think about this, please. I know that Proverbs 22:6 says what it says. "Train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he will not depart from it." I don't deny the general truth of that passage. The book of Proverbs is not written, though, to guarantee 100% maxims. Let me give you an illustration. Here's a proverb: "When a man's ways please the Lord, even his enemies are at peace with him." Can you think of a person's ways who please the Lord and his enemies said, "Crucify him, crucify him"? Jesus Christ was certainly the most perfect man that ever lived, and yet he had enemies who hated him because he taught the truth and they didn't want to hear it. And here's what I want you to stop and think about, because as I've grown older, I've understood something that I didn't understand in my youth. There are parents in pain who are sitting in these pews at these worship services who have, to the best of their knowledge and ability, done everything they knew how to do to raise their children up in the way they should go. And yet those children retain the same free moral agency that Adam and Eve did in the Garden of Eden. And I want to let that sink in. Who trained Adam and Eve? Who taught Adam and Eve right from wrong? And is there anyone here tonight that would say, well, if God had only told them this one more thing, they wouldn't have partaken of the forbidden fruit. If God had spent a little more time with them, they wouldn't have partaken of the forbidden fruit. Is there anyone here tonight that would suggest that Adam and Eve lacked teaching? Did Adam and Eve lack good teaching? Yes or no? No, they didn't lack good teaching. Did they lack a fatherly influence? No, they didn't lack that either. The Father God was among them and with them. So tell me, did Satan say, well, if these individuals have been trained by God, and if they have God as their father, then I've got no shot to go after them because they've got the best father in the entire universe imaginable. And so there's no shot. No, Satan still thought that even the people taught by God himself were fair game. And what makes you and what makes me think that Satan isn't going to try to come after our children when we are not as good as God? We're not as perfect parents as God was and is. So what makes Satan think that he can try to get to your child or mine? Free moral agency. The ability to make a choice that is contrary to teaching, just as Adam and Eve made a choice that was contrary to their teaching. Now, I'm not saying what I just said to give any parent, including this one, a free pass when it comes to parental neglect. I'm not justifying parental neglect, and I'm telling you, sure enough, there are some children that are the way they are because their parents did not parent. They didn't even try, really. They didn't give the time and the effort and the teaching that was needed. But I can also tell you that I've had elderly people come up to me after sermons that I preach like this with tears in their eyes. Brother Clarke, please pray for my son. Please pray for my daughter. We had them in services every time the doors were open, Brother Clarke. We had them at church services for Sunday morning Bible study, Sunday morning worship, Sunday night services, Wednesday night vacation Bible school, Christian camps, home devotions occasionally, teaching as we go down the road, looking for every opportunity. We'd travel to other congregations, gospel meetings, and they met someone after they left home. They met someone that didn't have that same background, and that someone they met has more influence over them now than all those years of training that we did, and it's breaking our hearts. I'm here to tell you, if you've ever wanted to know how the father in the parable of the prodigal son felt, think about how God feels. Who does the father in that parable represent? God. And yet the father in that parable had two sons, and frankly both of them at that time in the parable were wrong in one way or another. But it wasn't the father's fault that they were that way. They were free moral agents, and the Father God was willing to forgive both of them if only they would seek his forgiveness, and the prodigal did and received it. And so I can show you example after example where parents have been told what to do, and they've tried. But here's where I want to say something to the children. In Proverbs chapter 4, there's a statement that I'd like to show you that I didn't used to emphasize very much in my sermons on this subject. I spent all of my time telling parents what they should do, what they should do, what they should do. And I still preach on it. I'm doing that this week. But I don't try to be as lopsided as I used to be. In Proverbs chapter 4, notice verse 1. Children, hear ye children. This is not directed to the parent. This is directed to the child. Hear ye children the instruction of a father. More about that in a moment. And attend to know good understanding. I give you good doctrine, good teaching. Now watch. What's your responsibility? Once I've given you this good teaching, forsake ye not my law. Stop. Did God give Adam and Eve good doctrine in the Garden of Eden? Yes or no? What did they do? They forsook the law that God gave them and did their own thing. And as you read Proverbs chapter 4, and you'll notice in verse number 4, he taught me also, and he said, let thine heart, here's where we miss it sometimes, it is important for the parent to teach. It is just as important for the child to retain. Notice verse 4. He taught me also and said unto me, let thine heart retain my words. Don't let it go in one ear and out the other. Don't let it go there and live for a while and then depart. No, you keep these words. Get wisdom. Don't forget wisdom. And then he says in verse number 11, I have taught thee in the way of wisdom. I did. I taught you. I led you in the right paths. And now you're once saved, always saved. Because you were taught right, you're never going to go wrong. Look, some have misinterpreted Proverbs 22:6 almost to be a once saved, always saved passage. It's not intended to be that. Any more than this is intended to promise absolute guarantee of salvation. Once the teaching's done, what's the child's responsibility? Verse 13. Take fast hold of instruction. Don't let her go. Keep her. She's your life. And enter not into the path of the wicked. Don't even go in the way of evil men. Avoid it. Pass not by it. Turn from it. Pass away. And then he says in verse number 20, son, please listen. Attend to my words. Incline your ear. Lean forward to hear what I'm saying. Don't reject it. And then once you've heard it, don't let these words depart from your eyes. You keep them right in the midst of your heart, the Bible heart being the mind, for they are life unto those that find them, and health to all their flesh. Keep your heart with all diligence. And so let me ask you a question. Is it the parent's responsibility to educate? Absolutely. Notice instruction is emphasized here in Proverbs 4. Go back to Deuteronomy 6 and notice, beginning at verse 6, these words. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and beginning at verse 6. The Bible says, and these words which I command thee this day, notice, shall be in thine heart, and then what? You don't just store them there like it's a storage facility that never, no, you dispense the teaching that you put in your mind. You dispense that to the children. Thou shalt teach them, notice, diligently. It's not every now and then, it's a steady process. You're teaching diligently your children. You're talking of it when you're just sitting in the house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. And you'll bind them for a sign on your hand. You ever write anything on your hand so you don't forget it? This is the idea. You make sure it's right front and center in front of your eyes. Put a post-it note on the mirror if you have to remember it. Whatever the case, you need to remember these words. Do you know what Deuteronomy 11 then comes around and says in verse 18? And see if this doesn't sound familiar. You shall teach them your children, speaking of them when thou sittest in thine house, when thou walkest by the way, when thou liest. Haven't we already heard this sermon, Moses? Yeah, I preached it before. Moses in Deuteronomy 6 says something, and then in Deuteronomy 11, he's preaching the same exact material in his series of farewell sermons, which the book of Deuteronomy is. He is telling them the same exact thing in Deuteronomy 11, 18 to 21. And I love how Psalm 78 frames this. Which we've heard and known. How did you come to hear and know it? Our fathers told us. Now what's our responsibility? Now that we've been given the info, we won't hide them from their children, showing to the generation to come the praises of the Lord, His strength, His wonderful works that He's done. You see, Psalm 78 says that God established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which He commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, even the children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children. So you see the domino effect? This parent teaches this child, who grows up and becomes a parent, and teaches his child, who grows up and becomes a parent, and teaches his child. And when that continues, things are good. At least better. Better than they would be if there's no teaching. You have to do the teaching. Now, let's talk about teaching involving something that is even more than just words. There are some appropriate ways to teach behavior that involve something called discipline. Now, the word discipline is a very interesting word to me. If you cut the end of the word discipline off, what does it look like you have? The very end of the word discipline, cut it off, and you look like you have the word disciple. And that's intentional. What is a disciple? A learner. And what is it that we are to learn? A different way of behavior. And what's one of the ways we learn a different way of behavior? To learn that that behavior got me into trouble and I don't want to experience that feeling again. Now, Proverbs 13 is a very interesting text. And I want to show you that discipline sometimes involves the board of education applied to the seat of knowledge, as someone put it. Discipline sometimes involves the board of education being applied in a measured dose to the seat of knowledge. Proverbs 13:24. He that spareth his rod is parent of the year. Well, that might be what the community that you live in thinks. If you spare the rod, you're always going to be considered a good parent by some. And if you use a form of discipline, Some are always going to accuse you of child abuse, even though you're no more a child abuser when discipline's properly administered than a doctor is a child abuser when he properly administers a vaccination. I want to ask you moms, are you willing, by show of hands, how many of you moms would admit that you have taken your child to the doctor for the deliberate purpose of getting them a shot or a vaccination? Any of them? Look at all these barbarians sitting in this booth right now. You mean to tell me you knew what you were about to do to your child was going to cause them some tears? You knew that? And you did it anyway? And what would you say back to me? That's not child abuse. I was protecting my child from a greater pain by letting them experience a little stinging sensation just for a few seconds that would then inoculate them from a greater pain. I don't apologize for it at all, and neither should you. It's not anything to apologize for. But let me ask you a question. When the doctor gave the vaccination, did he come in swinging wildly with a needle, or did he actually, in a very measured, calm, rational fashion, pick him out a spot and inject the dose? And isn't that the exact way that we as a parent ought to handle discipline? We're not wildly swinging and getting out of control. We pick us out a spot and we apply the dose in a measured fashion. The doctor doesn't give you the full amount of vaccination that he could give you. He uses the exact right dosage. Now I realize this is where it's hard being a parent. I've heard someone describe it like this years ago, and I've always remembered the description. I either read it or heard it. I can't remember which one. But practicing discipline as a parent is a lot like trying to hold a wet bar of soap. What happens if you hold a wet bar of soap too tightly? What happens if you try to hold a wet bar of soap too tightly? It'll just squirt and pop right out of your hand. What happens if you try to hold a wet bar of soap too loosely? It'll fall right out of your hand. The key to holding a wet bar of soap is finding the right grip pressure, right? And that's easier said than done. You and I have to try to find the right grip pressure when it comes to discipline. And listen, sometimes that grip pressure involves no spanking at all. If a stern look gets it done for one of your children, the stern look is sufficient. If a timeout is sufficient for your child and you find it to be successful in working, there's nothing wrong with it. The nose in the corner, whatever your method is that you use, if it's working, there's no need to escalate it to the next. But if you're finding that it's not working, then there's nothing wrong, hear me, there is nothing wrong with a measured dose of discipline called a spanking if it's given in the right form, in the right fashion. Right? Now, I grew up with my mom and dad believing that a measured dose of discipline was needed at times. In Proverbs 19 and verse 18, look at the statement that is made there. In Proverbs 19 and verse number 18, the wise man Solomon wrote this, and I believe it. I believe every word of it. Proverbs 19:18, chasten thy son while there is hope, implying that if you wait too long, you can get to a point when it's not going to take as easily. A man came into a sculptor's workshop and he saw two sculptures of faces. One of them very sharply defined, had the eyes and the nose and the mouth and the ear. Everything was just very distinct and easy to see. Right next to it was something obviously made from the same mold, but the features were not nearly as sharp and distinct. Someone asked the sculptor, why do these look so different when they came from the same mold, when the same mold was obviously used? He said, well, on this one right here, I waited too long for the impression to be made, and it had already cooled too much by the time I tried to make the impression. And so it didn't leave the same kind of distinct clarity that the first one did when I got to it in timely fashion. You and I need to remember Proverbs 22 and verse 15. Proverbs 22 and verse 15. The Bible says, foolishness is bound in the heart of a child. Well, whose child is that talking about? Mine? Yes. Oh, that's brother so-and-so's child. That's sister so-and-so's child. It's not my child. Well, foolishness is bound in the heart of all children. That's why we have to train them not to be children anymore, but to become men or women. We have to train them. And the Bible says the rod of correction can drive far from them the things that need to be driven far from them. Look, when I was preaching at one congregation many years ago now, there was a 4-year-old boy that got him a brand new pair of cowboy boots, and they were sharp-pointed toes. One Sunday night after services, that boy went around kicking people in the shins with his new cowboy boots and then running away thinking it was hilarious. He kicked one elderly sister in the congregation, and she was one whose skin by that time in her life was paper thin. If she bumped into a door jamb, she'd bleed. So imagine being kicked in the shin by a 4-year-old boy that had pretty good size to him, and she was bleeding all over the place. I watched him do it, and I knew that if it had been my child, I'd want someone to inform me so I could fix it and take care of it. So I took the boy to his father and I said, look, I'm just telling you what I saw so that I can turn this over to you because I know you're the dad. And so he said, okay, well, thank you. And so he took the boy down front to the bench where the sister was sitting, and a couple of nurses in the congregation were attending to her bleeding and trying to get it to stop. And he held his 4-year-old boy there in his arms. He said, now you tell her you're sorry. He said, no. He said, now you tell her you're sorry. Do you see how you hurt her? You tell her you're sorry. And he said, no. And then I could not believe my eyes. None of us could that were watching it. He took his hand and slapped his father in the face as hard as he could. Left a big red handprint on his father's face. And his father reached up and said, now don't do that. We've talked about that. You know how I don't like it when you do that. He said, now you apologize to her. And the boy said, no. And he tipped his head back and then spit in his father's face. There were some of us wanting to initiate emergency adoption proceedings so that we could take the child into our care and provide an appropriate measured dose of discipline. I couldn't believe my eyes. His father reached up and rubbed the warm spit off of his face and said, now, you know I hate it when you do that. Why do you keep doing that when you know I don't like it? Do you have any doubt in the world as to who was running that house? So the elders selected me to go and visit this couple by myself. I really wanted them to come with me, but they said, no, you can handle it. But I've met some good elders over the years that they would have been there with me, but these particular elders said, you go take care of it. So I went to their house. And when I sat down, the mother came to me very briskly walking with a book in her hand, and she said, you need to read this. You need to read this, especially this chapter on the terrible twos. And it was a book by Dr. Benjamin Spock. And now, do you remember how old I told you her boy was at the time this was all happening? 4. So I guess I'm supposed to read the chapter on the terrible twos twice because he's twice as old as that particular chapter is addressing. So I started reading. She said, you need to read. I said, I had a Bible with me, and I said, can I ask you a question? Which of these books has more wisdom in it on how to raise a child? Which one? She said, well, the Bible, of course. I said, exactly, so we can put this one away. I said, oh, by the way, are you aware that Dr. Spock, who wrote this, has recanted his earlier writings and labeled them as too permissive. He himself realizes now that he was too permissive in his earlier writings. But even if he'd never recanted, the Bible is always right. And this Word of God right here, and I try to show her that there were times when the child had to be taught a certain form of behavior, and if the timeout didn't get it done, or some other form of discipline didn't get it done, then there would be other ways to handle it. With our own child, we learned this, our oldest child, when we moved to the South Haven, Mississippi area. We decided, as we were living in Horn Lake at that time, that my wife and I needed to go on date night. We had not been out on a date by ourselves for a long time, and there was a teenage girl in the congregation that was older, and she said she'd watch our child. And so she did, kind of. When we came home that night, our son had taken a black magic marker and made his own little Sistine Chapel in the hallway with all kinds of artwork and with permanent marker. Well, I knew that he didn't know any better, and so I'm not going to punish him with any degree of severity when he just doesn't know any better at that age. So I took him over. I took a wet cloth and tried to rub it. I said, "You see how hard this is to come off? You can't do this. You cannot do this, because this is hard to come off, and we're going to have to paint this or do something, and so you don't ever." And so we told him, I said, "If you ever do this again, what will happen?" And I told him what would happen. He said, "I get a panking." And that's right, you get a panking. And by the way, at that age, a measured dose is enough. You don't have to give much of a swat for it to seem to them like you just hit them with an axe. They're going to fall down and throw into all kinds of theatrics and act like, "Oh, you've just about hit me, run me over like a Mack truck." No, it was a very measured dose that I gave when they acted that way, and they were just being theatrical. But I remember some months went by, and my wife and I decided we got to have another date night. Well, I think somebody should have given us a panking, because we called the same babysitter. And we asked her to come over and watch our child that night, and she said, "Sure." Before we left, I took my son to the hallway. I said, "Remember this? All the work we had to do to get this looking good again? You remember that?" Uh-huh. And I said, "So, where did we tell you you're supposed to draw? On paper that you get from the babysitter or from mom and dad. We don't mind you drawing, but you have to draw on paper that you're given by us. You understand?" Mm-hmm. "And what will happen if daddy and mama come home tonight and you draw on the walls? What will happen?" "I get a panking." "Okay, we're clear on that." "Yes." Mm-hmm. "Okay. You already know where I'm going, don't you?" I came home that night, walked in the room, went down the hall. I could not believe my eyes. Michelangelo had struck again. What is good? I took him, I brought him. I said, "What did I tell you would happen if I saw this again, if you did this again?" He said, "I guess I could." "Okay. Well, I'm going to have to keep my word." And so I gave him a measured dose. My friends, I tried to avoid having to do it the first time, tried to educate him first. And you and I need to remember Proverbs 23. Would you look at Proverbs 23, 13 and 14? The Bible here says, "Withhold not correction from the child. If thou beatest with the rod, he shall not die. Beat with a rod and deliver his soul from hell." Listen, that sounds harsh, but when you compare it to what does rebellion against authority lead to ultimately? Eternal fire, eternal hell. I would rather give a dose of a spanking now that would try to keep my child to the best of my ability from pursuing that than I would to just say, "Well, I just have too much compassion. If I really care, I'm going to take the time to discipline." Look at Proverbs 29 and zoom in on verse 15. Proverbs 29, it's not just the rod, it's the rod and something. It's not just the and something, it's the rod and something. The rod and reproof give wisdom. You see, it's not enough to give the spanking and then walk away in anger without any explanation as to why you even did it. And I remember very vividly, in fact, I'm looking at a picture right now, and often preach this in the form of a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm looking at the picture that I used in that presentation right now of my wife hugging my son, my youngest son, Michael. When he was just a boy, he had this habit of going out after services in his nice church pants and sliding down the hill and getting them so stained with grass and dirt that they weren't wearable anymore for dress pants. And he'd been given proper warning as to what would happen if he kept doing that, and he kept doing that, and so my wife gave him a measured dose. But I took this picture, it wasn't posed for instead, it just happened to be near my camera phone at the time. It was a picture of my wife hugging our son after the discipline and telling him how much she loved him. It's so important to combine those two elements to make sure that the child knows this is not done because I don't love you, it's done because I do. And these children understand this more than I even realized as a parent. Our oldest son, when we were about 6 to 8 hours away from home, did something that I told him the next time he did it, it would mean the spanking. I gave him the education the first time, here's your chance. But if it happens again, this is what's going to happen. Okay, it happened. We're 6 to 8 hours away from home. We drive all the way home. When we get home, I'm exhausted. And I remember, oh yeah, I said I'm going to have to discipline him. So I called him in the bedroom and I gave him a couple of half-hearted swats, and then I turned around to hug him, and he looked at me and he said, "Are you trying to teach me that my behavior is acceptable?" He was like 8 years old at the time. I thought, that sounds really grown up. Are you trying to teach me that my behavior is acceptable? I said, well, what do you mean? He said, Dad, you've always told us that when you spank us, you try to make it hurt just enough so that we think, I'll never do that again because I don't want to hurt like that again. But that didn't hurt at all, so where's my motivation? His brother and sister have still not let him live this down. I said, how dumb could you be to admit to Dad that it didn't hurt at all? What do you think he's going to do after that? I said, so that didn't hurt at all? No. He says, I'm not motivated to change. I said, bend over. And I gave him a little more of a dose, but a still controlled one. Friends, I'm telling you, this country needs some reasonable discipline. It needs that, and it's going to have to start in the home. And that's why we preach on this subject. In fact, look at the statement that is made in verse 17. Correct thy son, and he'll give you rest. Yea, he'll give delight unto thy soul. And I'll start closing out with this statement right here. Some years ago, I was staying with a family, and they had a darling young boy. But he did not like bedtime at all. And when they said it was time for bed, he was like, oh no, it's not. And so he'd get up and come out, and then they'd put him back in. Then he'd get up and come out, and they'd put him back in. And this went on for an exhaustingly long period of time for the mother, and she just sat down one night in exasperation after I'd seen a couple of nights of this going on. She sat down in the living room where I was sitting with her husband, and she said, I just wish I knew of a way to get that boy to go to bed at night and stay in that bed. He's wearing me out. That's one of those times when you think, should I or shouldn't I? Should I say something or not say something? Because I'm no expert and perfect, but I said, I think I know the way. She said, are you serious? What, did you see it on 2020 or what? Where did you see it? What is it? What is it? I said, now, just hear me out on this. Don't write me off too soon. The next time you put him down tomorrow night, when you put him down tomorrow night, just tell him this. Say, Mama, has let you get by with getting up too much, and that's going to stop. So unless you're sick or have to go to the bathroom and really have to go, once you go to bed at night, you're in bed. Okay? That's the rule. And if you get out of bed, I'll have to give you a swat on your backside and let you know that that's not acceptable. She said, okay. And I said, now let me warn you about something. Because he's not used to that, he won't believe you're serious. And he's going to get up. And you're going to have to give him a swat on his backside. And he's going to fall down on the floor like you hit him with a jackhammer. And cry and act like you just killed him. And that's going to make you never want to do that again, which is exactly the way it's designed. You have to have enough parental fortitude to say, son, you throw a temper tantrum, I'll give you another swat. And you have to let him know you mean business and that you're running this place, not him. She said, okay, I'll try it. So the next night she gave him a much nicer version of this talk than the one that I was just describing. And sure enough, here he came. And she gave him a gentle swat on his backside, and he fell on the floor and went through all kinds of gyrations and acted like he was dying. And she looked at me and said, see, this isn't working. This isn't working. I said, you got to do it again. And she says, okay. This happened for a couple of nights. And he'd get up and come out, get up and come out. The third night, she put him down. She kept looking at the door, expecting him to come around the corner any minute. And he didn't. And she looked at me and said, he's dead. I said, no, he's not. He's not dead. No, he is. He would be out here if he was alive. I said, go look at it. Go look. She peeks in on him. Her little angel was asleep. She came out and got on the phone, called her sister in California, and said, you will never guess what I'm doing right now. I'm talking to you, and I'm not distracted, and I'm not exhausted, and I'm talking to you. And she was talking a mile a minute. She was resting because she'd been willing to go through some of that initial laying of the boundaries. And friends, I'm telling you, we have to apply this Board of Education, but that won't do any good if we don't educate followed by the word demonstrate. Look, children can see through hypocrisy a mile away. And if we educate them how to act and then act the exact same opposite way, actually, that we teach them to act, they're going to notice. I'll close, as I start closing out with these last few, they go rather quickly. We read in the papers, we hear on the air of killing and stealing and crime everywhere. We sigh and we say as we notice the trend, this young generation, where will it end? But can we be sure it's their fault alone, that maybe most of it isn't really our own? Too much money to spend and too much idle time, too many movies of passion and crime, too many books not fit to be read, too much of evil in what they hear said, too many children encouraged to roam by too many parents who won't stay at home. Kids don't make the movies. Kids don't write these books that paint this picture of gangsters and crooks. They don't make the liquor. They don't run the bars. They don't pass laws or make high-speed cars. They don't make the drugs that addle the brain. That's all done by older folks greedy for gain. And so in so many cases, it must be confessed, the label delinquent fits older folks best. We have a lot of responsibility to demonstrate to our children what we're doing. Little Johnny's playing with his truck on the stairs, and all of a sudden he lets out a string of profanity. His mother says, young man, you come here. Where have you ever heard language like that? And little Johnny said, well, that's what Daddy said last week when his truck wouldn't start. Oh, little Johnny was listening and watching. Yes. And we have to be aware of the fact that they see our honesty or dishonesty. This lost dog showed up in this child's yard, and he grew to fall in love with it. And he asked his dad, "Can we keep it? Can we keep it?" And his dad said, I guess unless somebody comes along and claims it, you can. Well, then some signs started showing up. Lost dog, very identifiable. It's a black dog with 3 white hairs around the area of its neck. 3 white hairs. The father knew that dog in that description was the dog his children had come to love, and it had those 3 white hairs. And his children saw that sign and they said, "Daddy, are we going to have to give the dog back?" And in their presence, he plucked those 3 white hairs so that no one could say that is the dog. You said your dog has 3 white hairs. He has none. What effect do you think that act of dishonesty had on those children? You and I have to be aware. And then next to last, we need to participate. Someone says a mom knows the exact length of her child when it was born, its weight. The mom knows the children's Sunday school teachers. The mom knows who the child's friends are. And the father is vaguely aware that some short people are living in the house. I don't want to be that father. I want to be plugged in. And I don't want to be that father that has the little girl come up to me and say, "Daddy, how much do you make an hour?" And so, what a question. Why would you need to know that? Well, I was thinking if I knew how much you made an hour, I could save up that much and get an hour of your time. That hurts. Participate in the lives of America's youth. Participate in the lives of your children. Take a moment to listen today to what your children are trying to say. Listen today, whatever you do, and they'll come back to listen to you. As I close, supplicate. Pray. This mother is praying for a child that hasn't been born yet. She already wants to be a good mother, and so she's praying fervently. And I'm telling you, when you pray in the presence of your children, don't doubt the impact that can make on them. Brother Robert R. Taylor Jr. used to tell about this soldier boy that was overseas, and his buddies were getting ready to go out for a night of partying and debauchery. And he said at first he was going with them. And then he heard the bells ringing at the local town clock. And he did the math in his head. My mom right now is at Wednesday night prayer service. I'll be safe physically, but she's also praying that I'll be safe spiritually. She's praying that I won't get involved in stuff like this. And he said to the guys, "You fellas go on, I'm going back." The remembrance of a praying parent made all the difference. I can't stand here and guarantee you that Satan won't try to come after your child or mine the same way he did after the ones taught by God himself. But I can tell you this. If I've done all that I can do to teach them and to show them both by my lips and by my life what is right and what is wrong, I have a much better chance for them doing what is right or coming back to what is right if they ever depart from it than I would if I didn't teach them. And so, I know what time it is. It's time for us to really get our children to think in a heavenly direction by showing them that in our lives. And thank you for being here tonight and showing that to your family. You're interested in spiritual things on this night. Thank you for that. If you're interested in eternal fellowship with God, you come to the right place. Through the blood of Christ, by hearing, believing, repenting, confessing, and being baptized for the remission of your sins, you can enter the church that belongs to Christ. Be forgiven by the blood of Christ at the same moment, and be added to that called out group, and then someday be called home to live with Him in the by and by. If you're already a child of God, but you're not living like it, not acting like it, if you've become a prodigal, the Father is waiting for you too. He'll run to meet you. Won't you get your life right if you need to? Right now. make sure your eternal home, as together we stand and sing, won't you please?
I pray.